The office clock ticked softly against the quiet hum of computers as Evelyn Harper stepped through the glass doors of Denton and Fields Real Estate Group. Her shoulders squared, her spirit steady. 27 years of loyalty had made those halls feel like home. Until recently. The air now carried an unspoken tension. The kind that follows when respect is quietly replaced with ridicule. Her coworkers glanced up, then quickly looked away. A few exchanged smirks that dissolved into feigned focus on their screens. Evelyn greeted them anyway. Her warm, "good morning," met with silence that stung sharper than any insult. Still, she pressed forward. That's what she'd always done. In her small corner, the one she'd once decorated with family photos and a tiny vase of daisies, a new sign had appeared. Administrative overflow. No one told her why, but she understood. The man who'd hung it wanted to remind her where she stood. That man was Bradley Kent, the new manager with a gleaming smile and colder eyes. Fresh from a private firm, full of words like modernization and efficiency, he'd walked in as though the company owed him applause. Within a week, he'd renamed departments, reassigned desks, and stripped titles from people he thought didn't fit the new vision. Evelyn, the oldest and only black employee on her floor, had become his favorite target. That morning, Bradley's voice sliced through the stillness. "Evelyn," he called from across the office, tone sharp, almost theatrical. "When you're done organizing paper clips, could you bring me the client list you misplaced yesterday?" Her hands paused mid-motion. The file he referred to had never left his desk, but arguing would only make things worse. "Yes, Mr. Kent," she replied quietly. A few interns chuckled under their breath. She caught the reflection of one in the glass partition, young, uncertain, laughing only because he didn't know how not to. Evelyn exhaled slowly and rose from her chair. For years, she'd trained new staff, handled accounts, kept schedules precise, and kept the office running like a living heartbeat. But now, under Bradley, that rhythm faltered. Meetings were held without her. Emails about key decisions stopped arriving in her inbox. Even her access card sometimes failed to open the conference room door. It was as if someone had decided to erase her one day at a time. She opened the filing cabinet, retrieved the list, and walked it to his desk. Bradley looked up briefly, his smile spreading like oil on water. "See? You still remember where things are. That's something." The words were coded in condescension, but the room laughed anyway. Evelyn placed the file gently before him. "You asked for it. Here it is." Her voice was steady, almost too steady. He leaned back in his chair, pleased with himself. "Perfect. Maybe I'll have you give a talk to the interns. Call it Surviving the Stone Age." Laughter again. Louder this time. She turned and walked away, face calm, steps deliberate. No one noticed how tightly her hands clenched. They thought she was too old to notice the cruelty, but she saw everything. The snickers, the whispers, the silent complicity. What they didn't see was that behind that quiet patience lay something far stronger than fear. At her desk, Evelyn opened her drawer, revealing a small flash drive marked 1997 to 2024. Every project, every report, every commendation, proof of her years of service. She slipped it into her bag. Her heart beat a little faster. She didn't know why, but something told her she'd need it soon. Outside the window, the city glowed under the first light of morning. A bus rumbled past carrying an advertisement that read, "Loyalty never goes out of style." Evelyn smiled faintly at the irony. Bradley called out again, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "And Evelyn, try not to be late next time. Punctuality matters in the real world." She looked at the clock. 8:15 a.m. She'd arrived 45 minutes early, her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Of course," she replied softly, turning back to her work. But in that still moment, something inside her shifted. Something small, silent, but irreversible. Because by the end of that day, Bradley Kent would learn that the woman he mocked had more authority than he could ever imagine. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing voices from every corner of the world come together. By the second week, Evelyn sensed the shift wasn't temporary, it was deliberate. The so-called restructuring that Bradley Kent kept bragging about had a pattern. Every new rule, every small adjustment, somehow trimmed away pieces of her dignity. Her desk, once positioned near the window where sunlight touched her plants, was now squeezed beside the supply closet, the spot no one wanted. When she returned from lunch one afternoon, she found her chair already moved, her old space occupied by younger employees she'd trained years ago. Bradley leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "We're optimizing space," he said with a smirk. "I figured you wouldn't mind the change. Less walking for you, right?" The words landed like darts. Evelyn forced a smile and nodded, though her throat burned. "If that's what the office needs," she said quietly. The next morning, her computer locked her out. The IT technician apologized, explaining her access had been revoked by management order. Evelyn thanked him politely and carried on, handwriting notes and using her personal notebook to stay productive. She had spent decades adapting. She would do it again if she had to. During the weekly meeting, Bradley made sure her chair wasn't there. He'd forgotten to include her in the invitation. From the glass wall, Evelyn could see them through the conference room, her department laughing at jokes she couldn't hear. She caught one intern glancing toward her with guilt before looking away. When the door opened, Bradley strolled out, pretending surprise. "Oh, Evelyn, didn't get the invite? My mistake." The grin said otherwise. She simply replied, "It's all right, I'll read the notes later." His laughter followed her down the corridor. By Friday, he decided to take the humiliation public. As a few interns gathered around his desk, Bradley called out, "Sweetheart, could you bring me the contract file from last quarter? The one you mixed up?" The interns froze. Some chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Evelyn walked over calmly, holding the folder in her hand. "Here's the document," she said, her voice even. Bradley didn't take it. Instead, he leaned back, eyes scanning her as if she were an inconvenience. "You sure this time? I'd hate to redo your work again." One of the interns muttered, "She's been here longer than all of us." It slipped out before he could stop himself. Bradley's jaw tightened. "Yes, and some people stay too long. Comfort kills growth." The room went silent. Evelyn placed the folder gently on his desk. Her tone carried quiet strength. "Then I suppose you're growing fast, Mr. Kent." He forced a laugh, waving his hand dismissively. "Relax, it's just banter." But everyone could feel the sharp edge under his words, the kind that wasn't playful, it was designed to wound. Later that afternoon, the missing file incident unfolded. Bradley stormed through the office, waving an empty folder. "Where's the client list? Did you misplace it again?" Evelyn looked up, startled. "It was on your desk this morning." He pointed at her, voice raised. "Don't shift blame. This is exactly the problem. No accountability." The office fell into uneasy silence. People stared at their screens, pretending not to hear. Humiliation isn't always in words. Sometimes it's in the way a room chooses silence over decency. Minutes later, Evelyn quietly found the folder, tucked beneath Bradley's own briefcase. She placed it on his table without a word. That evening, when everyone else had left, Evelyn sat at her small corner desk. The faint hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. She inserted her flash drive into the computer and began copying her files. Performance reviews, years of reports, and every email exchange that proved her worth. She didn't know why, but her instincts whispered that change was coming. And when it did, she intended to be ready. Not to fight, but to stand, calm and unshaken, in the truth she'd built her life upon. Outside, the city lights shimmered faintly against the glass. Inside, Evelyn saved the final document and whispered to herself, "They've mistaken silence for weakness. Let them." Because the first cut had been made. But it wasn't hers that would bleed next. The lunchroom once felt like Evelyn's refuge, a space where stories, laughter, and the smell of warm meals mingled with everyday noise. But lately, it had turned into something colder, quieter. Conversations paused when she entered. The same people who once asked about her grandchildren now glanced at their phones instead. Evelyn sat at a small corner table, her homemade lunch neatly packed as always, chicken salad, apple slices, and a cup of coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred in the sugar. It wasn't fear, but the exhaustion of pretending that cruelty didn't sting. At the far end of the room, Bradley's laughter rang out like a bad song played too loud. He sat with two younger staff members, the new interns who had joined only a month ago. Their voices carried across the cafeteria. "I swear." Bradley said between bites of his sandwich. "This company's turning into a nursing home. We've got people here who should have retired before the internet was invented." The interns laughed uncertainly, glancing at each other before one said softly, "You mean Evelyn?" Bradley didn't lower his voice. "Who else? She's sweet, but come on, she still prints emails to read them. That's prehistoric." Evelyn heard every word. She didn't flinch. She simply folded her napkin, cut another piece of her apple, and continued eating. Years of experience had taught her that silence, when chosen wisely, could be louder than any argument. But silence, in that moment, hurt. Bradley continued, oblivious to how small his mockery made him sound. "I'm telling you," he said, gesturing with his fork, "the company needs fresh blood. These older folks slow down innovation. They're just comfortable collecting paychecks." The intern across from him shifted uncomfortably, mumbling, "She's been here for decades. People say she basically built the filing system." Bradley chuckled. "Then maybe it's time someone upgraded it, and her." A few tables away, Evelyn's hand brushed her cup. The coffee tipped, splashing across the table and onto the floor. The clatter of the cup echoed sharply in the quiet room. Bradley turned his head, smirking. "Careful, Evelyn," he called out, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You really are getting too old for this place." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel from everyone. Some joined in just to blend in, afraid of standing out. But to Evelyn, it felt like 1,000 echoes bouncing off the walls she'd helped build. Her eyes met the reflection of a young intern watching her from across the room. He looked away quickly, guilt flashing across his face. She gave him a small, reassuring smile before bending to pick up the cup. She wiped the spill with calm precision, her movements steady, graceful. No anger, no tears, only composure. The same kind that came from decades of enduring storms without losing herself. As she stood to throw the napkins away, the room went awkwardly silent. Bradley cleared his throat, suddenly aware that his joke had hung in the air too long. But Evelyn said nothing. She placed her lunch back in her bag, adjusted her cardigan, and walked out with quiet dignity. Unknown to Bradley, just down the hall, Charles Denton, the company's founder and longtime owner, had arrived unannounced that morning. At 70, he still moved with the easy confidence of a man who understood people better than balance sheets. As he passed the open cafeteria door, he paused. The echo of laughter, followed by a strained silence, drew his attention. His gaze settled briefly on Evelyn as she walked out, shoulders straight, chin lifted. He recognized her instantly. When she first joined the company 27 years ago, he'd personally trained her on her first project. He remembered her dedication, the way she never left until every report was perfect. Now, watching her walk past without a word, Charles frowned slightly. The atmosphere felt off, heavy, disrespectful. He didn't need to hear the full conversation to sense what had just happened. As Evelyn disappeared around the corner, Charles turned to his assistant. "Who's that man sitting there with the interns?" "Bradley Kent, sir," the assistant replied, "the new operations manager." Charles's expression hardened, a rare flicker of disappointment crossing his face. "I see." He didn't say more. But for the first time in years, Charles Denton didn't head straight to his meeting. He stood there, thoughtful, his gaze fixed on the lunchroom where arrogance had just met its first quiet warning. Because while Bradley thought he'd humiliated an old woman, the man who built the company had just witnessed something far more revealing. And the lesson waiting ahead would change everything. Monday mornings had always been Evelyn's favorite. The rhythm of the office returning to life, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, familiar greetings echoing through the hallways, once gave her comfort. But lately, even the sound of footsteps behind her made her shoulders tighten. By 10 a.m., the reception area buzzed with energy. A longtime client, Mr. Langston, had arrived for a property negotiation. Evelyn had known him for years. She'd managed his account since the early days when the company operated out of a small downtown suite. He smiled warmly when he saw her. "Evelyn, still running this place, I see," he said cheerfully. She chuckled softly. "Trying my best, Mr. Langston. Can I get you a coffee while you wait?" He nodded, handing her a folder. "I brought the updated paperwork. It's all in here." Before she could respond, Bradley's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Evelyn!" The warmth in the room vanished. Everyone turned toward him. Bradley strutted from his office, his tie loose, his irritation evident. "What did I say about handling clients?" he barked. Evelyn blinked, confused. "Mr. Langston just arrived, sir. You were overstepping." He cut in, snatching the folder from her hands. "You don't handle important clients. That's not your role anymore." The suddenness of it made the air heavy. Even the receptionist stopped typing. Mr. Langston frowned. "Excuse me, young man. I specifically asked for her. She's been the only one keeping my record straight for years." Bradley gave a condescending laugh. "Well, times change. We have younger staff now, more up to speed with the system." He turned to Evelyn, his tone dripping with mock civility. "This is not a charity, Evelyn. You're lucky to even have this job." The words hung there, cruel and deliberate. The kind that wasn't meant to correct, only to humiliate. In that moment, Evelyn felt the weight of every silent battle fought by those told they should be grateful to exist. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. She looked at the faces around her, some staring at their screens, others pretending to read papers. Not one voice rose in her defense. Mr. Langston's brows knit in disbelief. "Son, that woman's worth more to this company than any manager I've met here. You might want to learn some respect." Bradley's smirk faltered for half a second, then returned colder. "Thank you for your feedback, sir, but I run this department now." Evelyn's gaze stayed steady. "Mr. Langston, I'll make sure your documents are in order," she said quietly. Bradley snapped. "No, you won't. I'll handle it." The client's jaw tightened. He snatched his folder back and muttered, "If this is how you treat loyal staff, I might reconsider our partnership." He walked out without another word. The glass door closed sharply behind him. Bradley turned toward the team, forcing a chuckle. "People like that hate change. Don't take it personally." But no one laughed this time. Even the interns avoided eye contact. Evelyn stood motionless, her heartbeat heavy in her chest. She could feel heat rising behind her eyes, but she refused to let it fall. Slowly, she turned and walked toward the restroom. Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed faintly. She gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection. Her face looked tired, not from age, but from carrying too much dignity in a place that no longer respected it. She turned on the faucet, letting the cool water run over her trembling hands. Then she washed her face, her movements precise, steadying her breath between each splash. Looking into the mirror, she whispered to herself, "Just 2 more years. 2 more, then I can rest." Her voice cracked slightly, the sound barely audible over the running water. She reached for a paper towel, wiped her face, and straightened her posture. When she stepped out, the hallway looked the same. Polished floors, framed certificates, people pretending not to see. But something in her had shifted. She walked back to her desk, calm but distant, like a storm waiting on the horizon. And as Bradley passed by, still gloating over his false victory, he never noticed the quiet resolve hardening behind her silence. Because destiny was already turning, faster than either of them could imagine. The hum of afternoon work filled the air when the glass doors at Denton and Fields swung open. The receptionist froze mid-sentence, eyes widening as a tall, silver-haired man stepped inside. No announcement, no warning, just quiet authority that needed no introduction. Charles Denton, the company's founder. The man whose name still gleamed in gold letters above the lobby entrance. Though officially retired, he'd built the company from the ground up, back when it was just 3 employees and a single rented office. His sudden appearance sent a ripple through the floor. Phones stopped ringing, conversations cut short. "Mr. Denton," the receptionist stammered, rising to greet him. "We didn't know you were coming." He waved gently. "No need for formality, Clara, just checking in. I was nearby and thought I'd see how my old home is doing." The word home carried weight. He took a slow look around. The glossy new furniture, the sterile decor, the unfamiliar faces. Something about the place felt colder, emptier than he remembered. As he moved deeper into the office, employees straightened up, their smiles tight and cautious. Charles nodded politely, but noticed the glances. People whispering when they thought he wasn't looking. It wasn't the same warm energy he used to feel walking through those halls. At one desk, he spotted an older employee he recognized, Janet from accounting. "Good afternoon, Janet," he greeted kindly. "Tell me, how's Evelyn Harper doing these days? Still keeping this place together like always?" Janet hesitated, Her eyes flickered toward the far end of the corridor. "Evelyn's still here, sir, but she's been, moved." "Moved?" he repeated slowly. "Where to?" Janet gave an uneasy smile. "The storage area." Mr. Kent thought her space was needed for new hires. Charles's expression darkened, just slightly, but enough to make Janet lower her gaze. "I see," he said quietly. Without another word, he started down the hall. The sound of his polished shoes against the floor echoed, steady and deliberate. As he turned the corner, the chatter in the office thinned into silence. He stopped at the end of the hallway, where the polished glass and chrome gave way to plain white walls and a small metal door marked storage. Inside, Evelyn knelt beside a stack of boxes, labeling files in her tidy handwriting. Her cardigan sleeves were rolled up, her face calm as ever. The small space smelled faintly of paper and dust, a forgotten corner of the empire she'd helped build. When the door creaked open, she looked up. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Denton?" His smile softened the years in his face. "Still working hard as ever, I see." Evelyn stood quickly, brushing dust from her skirt. "Sir, I didn't know you'd be visiting today." "I didn't either," he replied warmly. "Seems I've come at the right time." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carried both pride and fatigue. "This company, it's been a lifetime for me, Mr. Denton. I can't thank you enough for giving me a chance all those years ago." He studied her for a moment, the grace in her posture, the loyalty still shining through her exhaustion. "You earned everything yourself, Evelyn. I only opened the door." Her eyes misted slightly. "Things have changed, sir. The new management runs things differently now." He nodded slowly, glancing around the cramped room. "Yes, I can see that." For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths. Decades of effort now reduced to a corner and a label that said overflow. Then came the sound of approaching footsteps, confident, impatient. The door swung wider, and Bradley Kent appeared, phone in hand. He froze mid-step when he saw Charles Denton standing there. His smile snapped into place instantly. "Mr. Denton, what an honor. I wasn't told you were stopping by." Charles's eyes were steady. "I like to see things as they really are. Unannounced visits tend to reveal more truth than scheduled ones." Bradley chuckled nervously. Of course. We've been modernizing the structure, optimizing roles. Miss Harper here has been helping organize storage files. She's quite the help." The words landed like an insult wrapped in praise. Evelyn stood silent, her gaze lowered, though her heart raced. Charles turned slightly toward her. "Is that true, Evelyn? Are you enjoying the new arrangement?" Her lips parted, but she hesitated. Speaking honestly might cost her job. Still, her dignity wouldn't let her lie. "I do what's asked of me, sir," she said quietly. "That's all." Bradley's grin tightened. "She's being modest. We've been training younger staff and—" Charles raised a hand, cutting him off. "Mr. Kent," he said calmly, "when I started this company, every person here mattered. We didn't measure people by age, color, or how quickly they learned the newest gadget. We measured them by integrity and dedication." Bradley's face flushed, but he forced a polite laugh. "And we still do, sir, I assure you." "I'm sure you do," Charles interrupted, his tone unchanged, "though I'd like to speak with Evelyn alone for a moment." Bradley hesitated, his smile faltering. "This area is restricted now, sir. Company policy." Charles's eyes sharpened just slightly, the kind of look that had once closed deals worth millions. "I wrote those policies." For the first time since joining the company, Bradley Kent fell silent. He stepped aside, his jaw tight, and muttered, "Of course, take all the time you need." As the door closed behind him, Evelyn exhaled slowly. Charles looked around once more. The small room, the boxes, the silence heavy with humiliation undeserved. He didn't say it aloud, but his decision was already forming. Something inside him had reignited, a quiet anger, born not of insult, but of injustice. Because in that moment, he didn't just see a mistreated employee, he saw the very foundation of his company. Disrespected in the one person who had kept it standing. And that realization changed everything. By the next morning, rumor spread that Charles Denton's unannounced visit had shaken the floor. People whispered, rearranged papers nervously, and glanced at Evelyn with new curiosity, as if sensing that something unseen was shifting. Bradley, however, seemed determined to prove he was still in control. His voice carried louder than usual, his orders sharper, his arrogance burning brighter in front of the staff. That afternoon, the conference room buzzed with activity. Senior staff and a few high-profile clients filled the polished glass space, papers stacked neatly, and presentation slides ready to glow. Bradley stood at the head of the table, radiating smug confidence. Charles Denton, seated quietly at the corner of the room, had decided to observe the meeting in silence. His calm presence made everyone sit a little straighter, everyone except Bradley. As the meeting began, Bradley paced slowly, gesturing with the flair of a man desperate for attention. "We're modernizing operations," he announced, "and we need to highlight efficiency, not sentimentality." His eyes flicked briefly toward Evelyn through the glass wall, where she was organizing documents. "In fact," he said suddenly, snapping his fingers toward the doorway, "let's demonstrate something." He called out, voice sharp and deliberate. "Evelyn, come in here a moment." The room fell still. Evelyn looked up, startled. She hesitated for a breath before walking in, clutching a neat stack of files against her chest. Her steps were slow, deliberate, her poise unbroken. Bradley turned toward the clients with a false smile. "Everyone, meet Evelyn Harper, our longest-serving employee. Been here since, what, the fax machine days?" Laughter rippled across the room, forced, uneasy. Evelyn stood near the table, saying nothing. She'd been through this kind of humiliation before. Small, quiet attacks dressed as jokes. But this one carried a sting that cut deeper. Bradley reached across, plucking the files from her hands. "These are the client records," he said, flipping through them dramatically. "All handwritten notes, of course. We're going digital now. No offense, Evelyn, but we can't have people squinting over paper forever." Then, turning to his audience, he added mockingly, "You see those glasses she wears? Half the time, she can't even see straight. How's she supposed to type reports?" Laughter filled the room again, louder this time, echoing against the glass. A few senior staff exchanged awkward glances, but no one spoke. It was the same silence that had followed every act of cruelty before, the kind that allowed injustice to grow. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a lifetime of endurance finally meeting its limit. Her heart pounded, but her eyes stayed dry. Bradley smirked, enjoying the spectacle he'd created. Across the room, Charles Denton watched quietly. He said nothing. His gaze, calm but piercing, moved from Bradley's arrogant grin to Evelyn's trembling hands. Their eyes met, just for a second, and in that shared silence, she saw understanding. Not pity, but respect. Sometimes the loudest voices don't realize that the quietest ones are listening. Bradley continued, oblivious. "Evelyn, maybe next week we'll get you a tutorial on email attachments. Or do we need to start with typing lessons?" More laughter. The client smiled politely, unsure whether to join in. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. For the first time, she met Bradley's gaze directly. Her voice was soft but clear. "Mr. Kent," she said, "I may not type as fast as your interns, but every client who trusted this company started with these hands. And every success you're bragging about today was built on work you didn't even know existed." The room went utterly silent. Bradley blinked, caught off guard. "That'll be all, Evelyn," he muttered quickly, masking his embarrassment with irritation. "You may go." She turned to leave, her composure flawless. The quiet in the room now felt heavy, not with respect, but with shame. Every eye followed her as she walked out, and even those who'd laughed moments ago suddenly found it hard to look at one another. As the door closed behind her, Charles Denton's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Kent," he said evenly, "may I have a word after this meeting?" Bradley forced a grin. "Of course, sir. Always happy to get your insight." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Evelyn returned to her corner desk, breathing slowly, steadying herself. She didn't cry. She'd promised herself long ago she wouldn't give anyone that satisfaction. Yet deep inside, something was breaking, and something else was awakening. For years, she had endured, believing quiet grace was enough to survive. But that day, as laughter died behind the conference room door, she realized that survival wasn't the goal anymore. It was time for truth, the kind that couldn't be silenced by rank, arrogance, or privilege. And the man who once built the company with his bare hands had just seen exactly what he needed to see. The sound of forced laughter still lingered faintly when Charles Denton rose from his seat. The subtle scrape of his chair against the marble floor cut through the tension like a blade. The room, still buzzing with uneasy amusement, fell silent in an instant. Bradley straightened his tie, oblivious to the storm about to unfold. "Is everything all right, Mr. Denton?" he asked, smiling nervously. Charles's gaze was calm, but his silence carried the kind of weight that made every person in the room hold their breath. He adjusted his cufflinks, a slow, deliberate movement, and looked around the table. "I've sat here quietly long enough," he began, his voice low, steady, but impossible to ignore. Every word seemed to echo off the glass walls. "When I started this company, there were no fancy offices, no assistants, no titles to hide behind," he said, his eyes sweeping across the room before landing on Bradley. "We built this place with hard work, integrity, and respect for every person who walked through those doors, from janitor to executive." Bradley forced a chuckle. "Of course, sir. That's the legacy we—" Charles's voice cut through, firm and final. "Don't interrupt me, Mr. Kent." The color drained from Bradley's face. Charles took a slow step forward. "You've spent the last hour mocking a woman who's given more to this company than you'll ever understand. You just belittled the person who kept this place running when you were still learning to spell the word respect." The air thickened. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. No one moved. Bradley tried to recover, his voice shaking. "Sir, I think you're misunderstanding." "I'm not misunderstanding anything," Charles said sharply. "I've been sitting in that corner, watching the way you treat people, watching how laughter becomes cruelty and how silence becomes permission. But not today." He turned toward the IT technician seated near the back. "Can you confirm something for me, son?" The young man nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Who currently holds controlling shares in this company?" The technician hesitated, glancing at Bradley before answering. "You do, sir. Your name's still listed as the primary majority shareholder." The room froze. Bradley blinked, confused. "Wait, I thought—" Charles smiled faintly. "You thought wrong. I may have stepped back for health reasons, but I never relinquished control, and I certainly didn't hand my company to someone who mistakes arrogance for leadership." He turned to the HR director seated across the table. "Deactivate Mr. Kent's company ID, effective immediately." Gasps rippled around the room. Bradley's composure cracked. "You can't just—" "Security," Charles interrupted, pointing toward the door. "Please escort Mr. Kent out." Two uniformed guards entered quietly, professional but firm. One reached for Bradley's access badge as the other held the door open. "Sir, please don't make this harder than it needs to be," one of them said evenly. Bradley looked around the room, searching for an ally. But the faces that once laughed at his jokes now turned away. His voice broke with desperation. "You're making a mistake. I brought innovation here. I was cleaning up outdated systems." Charles's tone softened, but only slightly. "You weren't cleaning anything. You were staining the culture that people like Evelyn built with their blood and time. You thought progress meant stepping on the people who made it possible." Bradley's protest dissolved into silence. The guards guided him gently toward the exit. His footsteps echoed, heavy, angry, defeated, until the glass doors closed behind him with a final hollow click. 2 minutes. That's all it took for power to change hands. Charles turned toward Evelyn, who stood quietly near the doorway, still processing what had just happened. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice calm but filled with warmth. "You've given this company 27 years of loyalty, grace, and discipline. Starting today, I want you to step in as interim office director. You'll oversee the same department you've been holding together for years, officially this time." Her lips parted, stunned. "Sir, I don't know what to say," he smiled. "You already said it. Every day you showed up, even when others wouldn't. That's what leadership looks like." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a single pair of hands began to clap, quietly at first, then louder. It was the intern who'd looked ashamed in the lunchroom days earlier. Others followed, cautious, then confident, until the room filled with applause that felt like redemption itself. Evelyn stood still, eyes glistening, her heart heavy with gratitude and disbelief. Charles gave a final nod toward the team. "Let's rebuild the right way, with respect, with humanity." As the meeting adjourned, Evelyn glanced toward the empty chair where Bradley once sat. The laughter that had humiliated her hours ago was gone, replaced by the quiet dignity of justice restored. And though her hands still trembled, this time it wasn't from endurance. It was from the weight of long overdue triumph. By sunrise the next morning, the story had already left the building. Social media feeds buzzed with disbelief. Local news outlets splashed the headline across their pages. Manager fired after workplace discrimination incident. Witnesses call it long overdue. Within hours, the company's inbox filled with messages. Some came from former employees who quietly admitted they'd left because of the same toxic culture. Others came from clients praising the firm for taking a public stand. But amid the noise, Evelyn stayed calm. She arrived at work early, as she always did, her small thermos of tea in hand. The same doors that once felt heavy to walk through now opened with a quiet kind of welcome. Employees who had avoided her gaze days before now greeted her with warm smiles. Even the receptionist, whose laughter had joined in Bradley's cruelty once, looked up shyly and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Harper." Evelyn nodded kindly. "Good morning." In the conference room, reporters waited, cameras flashing as Charles Denton and the HR director prepared a brief press statement. But when they asked if Evelyn would speak, she hesitated. She didn't crave the spotlight. Yet she also knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced by prejudice dressed as professionalism. So she stepped forward. The cameras turned to her, and for a moment, the room felt weightless. She clasped her hands together, steady but humble. "What happened here," she began softly, "wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about respect. Something no title or paycheck should ever decide. I'm grateful that this company still has leaders who believe in that." A reporter asked, "Do you forgive him? The manager who humiliated you?" Evelyn paused. Her voice stayed even, but her eyes glistened. "Yes, because holding hate only keeps you tied to the same pain that tried to break you. Forgiveness doesn't excuse what happened, it just means I'm free from it." The room went quiet. Even the clicking of camera shutters slowed, as if the world itself paused to listen. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and the world still listens. The press conference ended within minutes, but the echo of her words spread far beyond those glass walls. Later that day, as Evelyn walked through the hallways, two interns, the same ones who had laughed along with Bradley, approached her nervously. One of them, eyes lowered, said, "Mrs. Harper, we wanted to apologize. We shouldn't have stayed quiet that day." Evelyn studied their faces, the discomfort, the shame, the sincerity. Then she smiled gently. "You're young. The world teaches you to laugh when others do, even when it feels wrong. What matters is that you recognize it now. Learn from it. Be better." The tension in their shoulders eased. They thanked her quietly before walking away, their eyes brighter than before. When she returned to her office, the one that now bore her new title, Interim Office Director, a small bouquet sat on her desk. A card read simply, "For the woman who taught us what dignity looks like." She sat down, exhaling deeply. Outside, the office hummed with renewed energy. Not from fear, but from respect reborn. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the place breathe again. Injustice thrives when good people stay silent. But the moment someone stands tall, even quietly, it begins to crumble. As the sun dipped beyond the skyline, Evelyn closed her notebook and smiled to herself. She hadn't just survived a storm, she had changed the weather. And though headlines would fade and reporters would move on, the lesson would stay. That dignity, once defended, never goes unnoticed. Weeks passed, and the once hostile atmosphere inside Denton and Field's real estate group began to feel unrecognizably different. The same halls that had once carried whispers of mockery now echoed with collaboration and laughter. The sting of discrimination that had hung in the air was gone, replaced by a quiet, genuine respect, the kind that couldn't be mandated by company policy, only inspired by example. At the heart of that transformation stood Evelyn Harper. Her new office wasn't the largest nor the most lavish, but it carried something far greater: trust. Every morning she arrived early, as she always had, but now her presence commanded reverence rather than pity. She'd begun hosting weekly mentorship sessions, gathering younger employees in the break room after hours. There were no titles in those meetings, no hierarchies, just people sharing stories. She taught them not just how to organize files, manage clients, or write reports, but how to treat others with humanity. Skill will open doors, she told them one afternoon, but compassion will keep them open. They listened, really listened. The same interns who once looked away when she was humiliated now leaned forward, taking notes, asking questions. One young woman spoke up hesitantly. "Mrs. Harper, how did you keep so calm when they disrespected you like that?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Because anger gives them what they want, proof that they can control you. Dignity confuses them. It shows that your strength doesn't depend on their approval." Her words became a quiet gospel within the company. Departments that had never interacted began working together. The Human Resources team launched the Harper Initiative, a quarterly program promoting workplace equity and diversity. Employees began nominating colleagues for acts of kindness rather than competition. The change was slow but real. Charles Denton watched it all unfold from his corner office, deeply moved. He often visited Evelyn's mentorship sessions, sitting quietly in the back as she guided discussions on empathy and leadership. One Friday morning, he called her into his office. When she entered, he stood, not as her superior, but as a man showing gratitude. On his desk lay a single document embossed with the company's seal. "Evelyn," he said warmly, "you've done more to restore this company's heart than any executive ever has. The board and I have agreed. From this day forward, you are reinstated as senior administrator for life. It's an honorary title, but it comes with full pension, lifetime benefits, and more importantly, the respect you've always deserved." Her hand went to her chest, eyes welling up. "Mr. Denton, I don't know what to say," he smiled. "You've already said it, in every act of grace you've shown." She took the certificate, her hands trembling, and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded. "No, Evelyn, thank you for reminding us what leadership really looks like." That afternoon, as news spread across the building, employees gathered in the lobby to applaud her once again. But this time, there was no pity, no forced politeness, only pride. Her quiet leadership did more for the company's soul than any policy ever could. While Denton and Fields thrived under its renewed spirit, somewhere across town, Bradley Kent sat in a cafe scrolling through rejection emails. His confident smirk had long disappeared. Every interview ended the same: polite smiles, then silence. Word had spread. His arrogance had become his reputation, and no resume could erase that shadow. He looked up from his phone, catching a glimpse of a news headline on a nearby screen. "From discrimination to dignity, Evelyn Harper honored for restoring integrity at Denton and Fields." For the first time, he felt the hollowness of his own downfall. Some rise by lifting others fall by stepping on them. Evelyn's victory wasn't in her promotion. It was in proving that grace has a power arrogance will never understand. And as the city lights shimmered against the glass towers that evening, Evelyn looked out from her small office window, knowing she hadn't just survived a war, she had rewritten the way battles would be fought hereafter. A full year had passed, and the name Evelyn Harper had become more than just a fixture on an office door. It had become a symbol. Across Denton and Fields, her story was now company legend, retold in onboarding meetings, printed in leadership newsletters, and whispered proudly by employees who'd learned what true integrity looked like. The 50th anniversary gala filled the grand ballroom that night, the company's logo gleaming in silver across the backdrop. Soft jazz played under the hum of conversation, and the room shimmered with polished glassware and quiet celebration. But amidst all the grandeur, it was Evelyn, calm, poised, and radiant in a navy dress, who drew every eye as she walked to the stage. Charles Denton introduced her with the ease of a man presenting not an employee, but a legacy. "Some leaders build structures," he said, glancing toward her, "and some build souls. Tonight, we honor the woman who gave this company both." Applause rolled through the hall like a wave. Evelyn smiled modestly, then approached the podium. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply looked out over the faces of those she'd mentored, those who'd once dismissed her, and those who'd quietly stood beside her through every storm. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, warm, and filled with quiet conviction. "Humility isn't weakness," she began softly. "It's the strength that keeps the world from collapsing under pride." Her gaze swept across the audience. "When I first started here, I thought hard work alone would earn respect. But I've learned that sometimes the world tests you not to show your limits, but to show your light. We cannot control how people treat us, but we can control what we choose to mirror back." The room fell utterly silent. Even the clinking of glasses ceased. She smiled faintly, her tone deepening. I was told once that I was too old, too quiet, too ordinary. But sometimes, the very things they use to count you out are the same things that make you unstoppable. Dignity doesn't shout, it simply stands. They said she was too old, too quiet, too ordinary. But 2 minutes of truth showed the world what real power looks like. Evelyn paused, letting the words settle. Then she added gently, to anyone who's ever been made to feel small in a room they helped build, remember this, silence is not surrender, it's strategy. And when you finally speak, make sure your voice carries truth, not bitterness. A hush lingered before applause erupted, long, genuine, emotional. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. Charles Denton clapped with a quiet pride only a mentor could feel. Across the ballroom, the interns she once guided stood side by side, holding their phones up to record her words, not for social media, but to remember them. Her story had become a blueprint for grace under pressure, a reminder that racism and arrogance might wound, but they could never define her. Later that evening, as the celebration faded into laughter and soft music, Evelyn stood by the window overlooking the city skyline. The lights reflected in her glasses, the same ones Bradley once mocked, now glimmered like medals of triumph. Racism didn't just cost a man his job, it cost arrogance its illusion of authority. Evelyn took a deep breath, smiling at the thought that even the quietest battles could rewrite entire histories. The camera lingers on her calm face as the narration closes with emotional weight, a final reflection not just for her, but for every listener who's ever carried unseen scars. Power isn't in how loud you speak, but in what your silence teaches once the noise ends. Evelyn Harper never shouted for justice. She simply lived it, and the world adjusted its tone. Then the voice shifts slightly, drawing the audience in, intimate, reflective, and engaging. If you were Evelyn Harper, would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Have you ever seen power turn against its own cruelty? Do you believe dignity can defeat discrimination with outrage? And what would you do if the person belittling you suddenly had to answer to the truth? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if this story touched you, remember to like, share, and subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. Because silence should never be the end of any story.